Welcome, welcome, welcome. So sorry. Our apologies for starting just a minute or two late. We had a couple technical difficulties, as we know. That is just the way things go sometimes. So thank you, everyone, for your patience as we were jumping in here. Very much appreciated. We are grateful to you all for joining us. I am LaDonna Lockard. I am the CEO of MaxClass. I am joined today with the incredible Jeana Lanktree. Jeana is our Director of Training and Compliance, and we are so grateful to have her here. So, with that, let's go ahead. Let's jump in. Let's get started. This webinar today is a date with Section 8, what you can and can't pay for. We decided to go with this topic because even though it's been around since 1974, RESPA Section 8 is not new. There's still a lot of confusion that surrounds it. There's a lot of misconception. So, Jay, I want to know from your opinion, why is this so confusing for people? Why is it that this is over 50 years old and here we are still talking about it?
Well, it's not a new topic to your point, and it's almost surprising to people how long it's been around. I mean, it's having its big 50th birthday this year, and so you would think we wouldn't be talking about it anymore. But historically, we are a an industry of rule breakers. We don't like to follow rules. And it's actually, as funny as that is, there are three real main reasons. And one, the terms in the regulation is vague, right? They're talking about terms like items of value, agreements, they're very vague terms. They're not very clear. And so they're open to interpretation. And the more interpretation that they're open to, the more likely they are to be misconstrued and misapplied. There's a second layer as well. And the second layer is that a lot of people just have not been there. It hasn't been enforced very well. So, initially this
Hmm.
was launched by HUD. 2011, the CFPB came and took it over. And the reality is there hasn't really been clear enforcement or clear guidance around what's permissible, what's not. The terms are very vague. And then, I think thirdly, we're an industry that is heavily reliant on relationships. We're a relationship industry, and we're talking about an industry that has high monetization, and we have these relationships that are reciprocal, and nobody does anything for nothing. There is some implied duality in these relationships where, hey, you're going to be my best agent and I'm going to be your best lender, and because of that we're going to do business together and dominate this industry. And that's an unimplied agreement, right? That's an agreement of referral base. So things like that are what get in the way of this. And it's interesting to watch how people navigate it, because historically we haven't navigated it very well. I mean, we did have a lot of relationships, and the whole reason that this came about was because it used to be, that we were charging excess fees. We would pay those to, whoever our referral partner was, as an incentive to keep sending us business, and the consumer was getting the brunt of those fees. So that's how we're sitting in the boat that we are today.
It's incredible that all these years later, that's still happening. We know that it does still happen, that there are certain fees that are baked in and they're made to look like something else. And I feel like that is why this does keep coming up. So, with that being said, there are three different parts to RESPA Section 8. You have 8A, 8B, 8C. What do you feel like is kind of the most practical application for MLOs? What should they really be considering when they're thinking about RESPA?
I think you break it down as simple as possible. That's one of the reasons we want to do these webinars, because these topics are really complex, and we're in the industry. We see how they're applied to your day to day, and so keep them in mind for three things. A is just talking about incentives and referrals, right? Kickbacks. So they're talking about kickbacks and referrals. Are you actually paying to play in this case, right? Are you paying somebody to send you business in one way or the other, whether you're paying them for the referral or expecting a referral for a payment of some sort? Or are you kicking anything back? Meaning, if you do a transaction with them, are you giving them money in return? Section B is interesting because this is on split fees. So this is incentivizing somebody to give you business that isn't actually doing work on the file, or splitting fees inappropriately or disproportionately for the work done. And then when you're looking at Section C is your safe harbors. This is the area that's kind of your protection layer. If ever you are under investigation or when you are considering going into some of these agreements, you want to know what type of things are going to keep you safe if ever you are reviewed and audited. And we'll talk more about that later on in the course or in this.
I'm
Yeah.
webinar. I know we're so used to just holding courses. So in breaking them down, I appreciate that so much. Thank you for the delineation between the three. We know that, like you mentioned up top, a thing of value is famously broad. That's a very broad term, and that is what trips people up so much. What do you think is kind of the most surprising thing of value that either MLOs or maybe their referral partners aren't considering?
Well, I looked this up actually. I've done quite a bit of research on this and got a couple topics. One of them is disproportionate fees for things. So, things
Mm,
like office space. This was interesting. Office space was one where people were sharing office space. And when they looked at them, there is a fair market value for an office rental space in each location. So, when they saw some of these, what the fees that were being actually paid for those office spaces were disproportionate to what an office space would actually incur the fee for in that location. That's considered a thing of value. So that was one of the items that was consistently over and over and over an area that came up. Another was co-branded marketing. So
mm,
co-branded marketing, I this was interesting. I heard a phrase and it said, a successful relationship is what ratio? And a lot of people said, oh, 100, 100. Like, if you're in a loving relationship, I put in 100, you put in 100. And they came out and they said, actually, no, it's 100 and zero, right? You give 100%, you expect zero in return. And because of that zero expectation, the relationship seems to work. Well, we're really bad at relationships, right? I mean, look at our relationship breakup rates. We're not good at it. So we're not good at it at a personal level, let alone at a business level. So, as we're going in, you're seeing these co-branded or these co-marketing agreements, and the agent has 90% of the flyer, and here's the lender in the bottom corner, and yet the lender paid for the postage or the lender paid for the printing, things like that. Those are all violations because it does have to be proportionate. And some
mhm.
reports are as specific as saying that if the lender pays for it, they want to see at least 75% of that lender being represented on that flyer, not even 50-50. So that was an interesting takeaway was they were going up to 75%.
It is really interesting when you consider proportions because people don't always factor in the full proportion of what that maybe incurs, what the incurred expenses are with putting that advertisement out there. So not you can't just necessarily break it down of, hey, you have 75% of this, I have 25% of this, I'll pay you 25%. It's not always that cut and dry. We do have to
Yeah.
factor in those other costs. We have to factor in time, and we have to factor in what the market going rate of that would be. And I think the real estate agent office is a perfect example of that. So many times we see partners who will give you access to a space at a, preferred rate. But if it's not fair market value, it can be considered a RESPA violation. So I really appreciate that distinction. And it is a gray area. There's a lot of gray areas in this because we do want to build those relationships with our referral partners. So, how do people make that distinction of what is allowable and what's illegal? When do we know when we've crossed that line?
Here's the easiest way to think about it. And remember, I'm on the LO side, right? I don't work for the CFPB. I'm not a regulator. I'm not out there
We're not
enforcing
here
all
to
this.
turn anyone in.
No, we're not. I've been on the other side, right? I'm here to help you guys navigate it and protect you in this case and find ways you can leverage this. So here's one of the biggest things was it's inclusivity. It comes down to one thing and it's inclusivity. So if you're sponsoring an event, if you are paying for, interestingly enough, CE, right? You're paying for CE,
Mhm.
something like that. It can't be individualized. It has to be generalized. So if you're going to an office, say you're going to your top agent's office, and you're going, hey, look, I want to support you guys and I'm going to put on a CE thing, invite the entire office. That's the way to stay safe because then you're not doing a CE course for your top agents or expecting referrals in return. Now, between all of us and, eyes, closed ears, if anybody's, the reality is there some form of expectation of referrals eventually to come to you? Absolutely. Like, we're not naive, right? The reality is you don't want to just spend your day community service out doing CE courses for people or, teaching products or different parameters, programs, whatever. Some of it's for socialization, and that's great. But there is always some unintended, expectation that somebody's going to see you, they're going to like you, and because of that, they're going to want to do business with you. That's all fair game. You can do that. Like, you expect people to like you. You expect people to want to come do business with you and utilize your expertise and have a good relationship with you. Where it goes astray is when it's like, hey, and I see this a lot. This is really interesting. I'll go in and there's people that will, go into an office space and they'll put their desks there. They'll do the desk rental thing and they automatically expect that because they're paying that agent's office X amount to rent those desk spaces, that a certain percentage of loans will be assigned to them or go to them. In fact, this is something people track. This is something people want. It's out there. It's what's happening. We can pretend that it doesn't, and we can, we're not regulators on here. And the reality is most of the people that are enforcing this aren't on the street day to day. They're not seeing how this actually applies in real world and what's happening. But this is kind of what happens. And so with that, there's other ways around that. And it comes down to verbiage and inclusivity and making sure that invites stay general. And if you do those things, for the most part, 99% of the time, you're going to be A-okay.
I Here's where again things get really tough for the average person, and I really appreciate this comment from Mina, who says, "With actual kickbacks happening, how does one attract a real estate agent without this? Kickbacks are happening every day, all day. Rule compliant MLOs are left out of the race if you play by the rules." And I can think of kind of a prime example right off the top of my head where I was invited to an event at Topgolf by an MLO. I was invited as MaxClass. They wanted me there as a representation of MaxClass, but I am also a licensed realtor. So I was like, okay, wait a second. They're paying for everything, they're sponsoring it. Is this considered a violation? So I called and I actually asked the DRE here in Utah. The person that I talked to in their legal hotline was like, absolutely, your attendance is definitely a violation of RESPA. And later I was like, wait a second. I'm not referring anything their way. I've never referred anything their way. I'm going as a representation of my company. How are they supposed to sponsor things? How are they supposed to get their name out there if it's already considered a violation just putting this event on? So was that a misinterpretation of the rules?
Absolutely, it was.
I
So
think
this
so
is what's
too.
interesting, right? It's with the expectation, written or unwritten, of some type of kickback or a referral. If you're there for general enjoyment and there's no intention, say you're going and you're like, this doesn't mean that I'm going to give them business. I'm going because I want to meet them. I want to see. Maybe one day that does result in business. That's not a violation. So this is one of those areas that I'm talking about where the people enforcing or the people sharing information don't actually understand how this applies in real world.
Bingo. Bingo. You nailed it. I mean, it's so comparable to the conversation that we had 2 weeks ago around LO Comp of you have these people who think that they understand down to the letter of the law, but what they're not factoring in is real world application. So that's exactly what we're trying to do here with these webinars. Neither myself nor Jeana are lawyers. We're not. We are just people who have worked within the space. I've now been in this space for over 20 years. Jay, you're about there with me. So we've seen a lot of this. I actually helped to found a compliance department at my previous company. Jay, you've worked in and out of this, in and out of situations. We have seen all sides of this industry. So
Yeah.
that's really what we're trying to do here is provide you with that clarification of here are the gray areas. Here's what's it's being said in black and white. let's see where we can fall within the middle because we know that the world lives in gray area.
Yeah, I think we're a bridge, LaDonna. I was thinking like, how would people think of us? And I'm like, we're researchers and we're a bridge of information. So we're researching, we're digging in, we're asking the questions, and then doing our own diligence and getting resources that have the knowledge, putting that all together and going, let's make sense of this and bring this out to the people that are in it day to day because the information they're getting just isn't always accurate.
Agreed. Agreed. Let's shift gears just a little bit. I want to talk about MSAs because MSAs have been a hot topic for so long. It feels like just when people seem to think they've got a handle on it, they find out they've been doing them all wrong. So, what would you say is the best way to structure an MSA lawfully so that you're not running into any of those red flags that could potentially turn
Yeah.
into a Section 8 violation?
So there's a couple things, right?
What you
One of
got?
them is having clearly defined services. So you need to know what the
Finish
clearly
off.
defined services are. In addition to that, you have to have
Blueberry
fair
muffin.
market compensation for
Want
those
them?
services. Uh-oh, we need somebody to mute their line.
Yeah, and I
We
don't
need somebody to
know.
mute their line.
I'm not sure how they even have access because everyone's mics should be muted, but that's okay. We're on
Yes,
it.
that's okay. Let's repeat that. So here's one of them. You want to make sure that you're actually like doing the service that are actually performed, right? So if you're getting compensated for something or if you're paying for something, is there an actual service attached to that? That's the big one, right? Are you actually in a desk? If you have an affiliated business agreement and you own an insurance company, do you actually have licenses and phone numbers and locations and a licensed insurance person in that affiliated business that you own that you get a referral portion of? So things like that, right? You want to make sure that it's actual services rendered, that they are fair monetized value. What you're paying for is fair in current market date. Or you can justify it. I just saw a thing, how do we, rent for inflation? I think it popped up briefly. If you
Mm.
have a rental or a lease agreement that you've been under for several years and that's what you paid, that's what you're still under, you're fine, right? You can show a history of that payment. You can show that, hey, we just honored the original agreement. That's fine. It comes down to documentation, a lot of documentation. And then is the service actually defined? So I think that's the biggest one, defined service. And that's where it gets vague. A lot of people have side agreements in this industry, a lot of handshakes, things like that. So those are all big things. What's interesting is a lot of people are going, well, what do we care about enforcement? Because the CFPB is in a bit of a restructure, a
Yep.
restructure.
We know they're not going anywhere. It's
They're,
been
they're,
approved. They're not going anywhere,
they're
but
making some adjustments. They're making some adjustments, whatever that looks like. If you on our last podcast, we said, the time will tell what that looks like in the future. But I think a lot of people think, well, heck yeah, this is Wild West now, right? And what's interesting is I saw had two discussions on this, and we'll circle back to this at the very end. One of the discussions were, well, who's going to regulate this, right? I mean, it's their game right
mm,
now. Who's going to come after us? Who's going to regulate that? And one of the things that I would caution against is it's interesting how much data is out there right now, how quickly it is to assess the data, and how quickly it is for that data to tell a narrative without differing any behavior from anybody. You can see if agent X is consistently giving loans to lender Y and they just so happen to be on a trip to Tulum every quarter, right? The quarters that they've done more business, they're on more trips together, right? You can see that, and these new technologies are going to start piecing those things together and creating the story much quicker. So although we're thinking that we're under less scrutiny, it could actually turn out to be quite different, and it's easier to compile the data, it's easier to look at the patterns, and it's easier to now start enforcing some of these. So it could go either way. We don't know which way it will go, but just be be cognizant and be aware and make sure that you're following those things. Some of the things that are interesting is, with the documentation is a big one. Your money spending patterns. This is something they look into when they go into investment.
mm,
Where does that money go? They want to look at all of that. And did X amount of money go to X amount of real estate brokerage? Did this go to this particular realtor over, was money exchanged without an actual event? was, did anything change hands of value? And they're going to be looking at all the things, um, without some, with some type of intent or with something that is bridged to that. They're going to be looking at it. And what's interesting is most of the time, they're not finding these because somebody turns you in. Although there's whistleblowers, there's all kinds of ways that this gets on their desk. It was in some of my research, what was interesting was they said, we're usually looking at something else, but then we always go to RESPA because everybody's violating RESPA in some capacity. A lot of people didn't know the CFPB had an entire team. And guess what this team did? That's all they did was go through your Facebook posts. They would go look up who the MLO was. They'd get their license number. They'd go look at all their social media. And they were building a case looking at what is this person actually doing? They would start gentle with sending them a gentle message or something like that. And then it escalated. Do people still get away with it? Absolutely. Are people still
Mm-hmm.
doing it? 100%. And so navigating within that space and staying on the side of compliance while still being able to capture business is a challenge that each of us have. And so the more you have in writing and documentation as you're going into some of these agreements, the better off you're going to be. Make sure that you're actually getting fair payment or giving fair payment for the services rendered. And then make sure if you're saying there's an event, there's actually an event that's taking place, and that event is inclusive and is generalized to that general office, that general location. That there's something out there that has a broader invite than to specific agents that you do direct business with.
That does make me think of the ongoing litigation happening right now between UWM and a broker, where the broker has referred 100% of their loans to UWM. And because of that, they've since been audited and found out, and now are being told that, like, no, actually, you're an employee. You're violating these different rules. And it's one of those areas that I feel like, given the way that the CFPB is going through their restructuring, the states are trying to figure out where they need to come into play. We're going to start seeing a lot of those different interpretations because of that. And so
Mhm.
it's not one of these times where we get to peel back our compliance. It's one of these times where we actually need to be ramping it up more, because different states can have different, I don't want to say interpretations, but different spins. They can have
Mhm.
their own variations of these laws and rules. So you can technically be violating state law, but not violating federal law.
It's true.
So just something to keep in mind. State law is based, it's modeled after the federal law. It can always have its own interpretation.
Well, it's interesting, LaDonna, because certain states have certain rules and parameters on the percentage that you can give to any one entity. This was really interesting. So I believe it was Ohio. Ohio has 40%. More than 40% of your business going to one entity is a red flag for them.
Yep.
I think Florida was like 70%, right? Depending on the states. And don't quote me on this. I can get more information that's more factual out to people. I don't have a notes or slides or anything here. We're winging it. But in that research, there are specific percentages that are allowed to go to one entity. And if you exceed that, it's a red flag. They're going to look into it and it's going to be a challenge. So to LaDonna's point, absolutely know your state.
I completely agree. And another very common area, we'll get into this in future webinars, but if they're already looking into you, you're probably going to get a UDAP violation in there too, just because UDAP is another one of those federal laws that is so vague and so broad. And it's designed intentionally to be that broad so that if they're targeting you, they have one more thing to look at you at. So, just one more thing to keep in mind. You talked about how the unwritten agreement problem is very real because the regulation says an agreement doesn't have to be written or ever spoken. It can be established by that pattern of conduct. So, what exactly does that mean in practicality for our MLOs who maybe never put anything in writing? They didn't understand that that's what they were doing. What advice would you have for them?
So you definitely want to revisit those things, right? If there's an area where you're like, I'm not sure about this, follow your gut. I'm a big proponent of follow your gut. If your gut is saying some doesn't feel right about this or something isn't quite right there, go revisit it and look at it and go, okay, if somebody was looking at this from the outside, could they build a pattern that this would look like I was, maybe had an undetermined agreement with them, right? And granted, there are those. They exist, right? The better you are at your business, the more those agents want to come to you. The more those things are, and people work with people they like. They're friends.
They
They're golfing
do.
on the weekends. They're going to the spa. They're doing all these different things together because they do become friends. And the big differentiator is there any implied referral incentive tied to that? So can
Mm,
you tie that you guys are doing things as friends outside of business, right? Yes, you can. Okay, great. Now take it a step further and go, okay, what are we doing that's business related together? What are we doing that's not business related together? And do we have some type of mutual friendship connectors outside of just network or marketing together or, doing things like that? So it's really interesting. So look at the patterns you have and just go, does this make sense? Like if somebody was looking at this on paper, does it make sense? And if it does make sense, like, um, we're both into nails or we're both into woodworking or we're both, there's different things like that, right? Where you have a natural connection. There's some people you just have a natural connection with. And so if you can work through that and show that, hey, there's nothing extra there, you're going to be much safer. Now, granted, most of these relationships don't have that. A lot of these relationships are, you know, based off of working relationships. And
hmm
if they are, just make sure that whenever you're doing some type of event, you have something generalized out there. So it's not one to one, it's one to many. And, to some people, will they say, well, how do we get into business? Because we know these other people are paying for them. We see this all the time. I see new
hmm
people come into the business and they'll go, well, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to pay for this? Are you going to, I have an event. I want you to pay for this. I want you to sponsor the food. I want you to sponsor all these things. You can do that. It does have to be disclosed that you're sponsoring. You can't just disclose. You can't sponsor without it being disclosed.
Just slide them some cash over the table and say, here
Yeah,
you
you can't do
go.
that. You can't do that. So you do have to disclose that, but there are those relationships and they do happen. And what I would say is start offering as much service and value as you possibly can in the sense of knowledge, in the sense of helping them out with things, in the sense of being in front of them, and anything you bring of value outside of that that would be tied to any type of referral, anything like that, make sure that it's one to many, and then if referrals come in, that's a safe space. So that's one of those areas where you just got to look at it. You've got to kind of dissect it from the outside and go, does this make sense? Initially it might not. It might go, okay, this looks like definitely we have a referral agreement here, so mix it up a little bit. Throw an event for the entire office. Do something for all your agents, right? Do something that's fun and inclusive of anybody in that space or in that location, and then you can kind of differentiate a little bit from that and get yourself out of some hot water. I think identifying it is the quickest thing you can do to make some adjustments.
I like
Cruises.
the,
We saw this. Cruises come up a lot, LaDonna. People love to
yeah,
do
sure.
cruises. So here
Yes.
was one way. Like one way people were saying, if you refer a loan to me, you get a raffle ticket and I put it in the bucket for your cruise, right? This was one thing that came in. Another one was for every 4 referrals, I'm sending those agents on a cruise. Those are both going to get you in a lot of hot water.
No, that's
But
not great.
yeah, I mean, here's the caveat to that. If they threw an event, or if they said, if you're an agent in this location and we are giving away a cruise and anybody could get a raffle ticket to put in there for, you know, something not referred, not, attached to a referral or not attached to loans that had come their way, they're completely compliant. Or if you're having a big event, you can give away a cruise if everybody in the room can input for the raffle and not just the people that send you business.
Regardless, I love that distinction because you're right. We've heard those situations and scenarios that people say, well, what if I just do this? And
Mhm.
every time it's like, well, what if you did just do that? How is that going to be interpreted? How is that going to be perceived? So we have this question that it plays right in with this. How can people show appreciation for their real estate partners if after closing a few, transactions with someone, is there something that they can do to show some appreciation? I'm going to let you think on it for just one second while I bring up you can always show that someone is valued, not always through a monetary gift. So, something that I had a conversation with a title person, actually, we were talking about this webinar, and they were like, oh my God, that's such a brilliant touch point. I can share that with my realtors. I can share that with my MLOs to let them know I'm thinking of them and that this could be a great webinar for us to all watch. It's something that I can send to them to show them that I'm thinking of them. So creating those different touch points. But now, having said that, not everyone is going to love a webinar as a thing that you're providing for your appreciation. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is where it gets a little tricky, right? Because technically the rules say nothing of value. However, there have been some calls in and some questions, and there's this false rule of anything under $25. That rule
I
does not
love this.
actually, I mean,
No.
it's everywhere, right? Everybody's like, well, it's under
Yeah.
$25, I'm
Just
good.
keep it under
And
25.
yeah, there's no actual rule that says anything under $25. However, there have been multiple calls in, and the CFPB has responded. Now, this is where you got to buyer beware, right? Because half the
Hmm.
information is inaccurate. You just got told you were in a RESPA violation for attending an event,
Yeah.
and we know that's not true. So the response has been more than several times. We're not going to look into things of less than around $25, right? That's what they're saying. Now, if there's a pattern where they show that, you know,
Every day you're
let's
getting
be
something
honest.
of
Yeah,
$25.
I mean, if we're in LO, we see our borrowers that don't want to get flagged for large deposits in source, so they're depositing layered deposits. It's the same thing. If you're layering those $25 to your agents, they're going to look for the pattern. So, occasionally, every now and then, you want to send a card, you want to send a little token
A
of thank you so
promotional
much, right?
item.
It's a gratitude. It's not an incentive to refer. And so I think that's where you've got to really, make sure that you document and that it's unanimous, right? If it went to one agent, do you do that for all of your agents, right?
Mm.
Is it if somebody, somebody brought little glass hearts, right? And they brought them in and they did little glass hearts for everybody. And what was interesting was they did it, it was their top agent, but this is how they loopholed it. They did it for their entire group. So they did it for their assistant and for, anyone in that office that was attached to that team. They brought these little glass hearts and it was very, very sweet, very genuine. And it was just a little token of gratitude and appreciation.
Yeah, promotional items are just fine. They are just fine. Let's clarify that.
Great
Um,
question, Mina. Mina's asking, can you go to lunch and pay for lunch? This is a big
yes, it
misconception.
is. It
You
is.
can. You can. You can pay for lunch. You can pay for coffee. Here's the caveat and what keeps you safe. You're actually at the lunch. You are physically present. And so because you are physically present and you're engaging in an activity with them or spending time with them, building relationships, that's considered marketing, right? It's considered more of
Hmm.
marketing. So you are allowed to go ahead and pay for lunch. You can pay for a coffee. You can pay for all that. Now, if you're paying for their family to go on their family trip or their anniversary dinner and you're not there, that might not be good. If you are there on their anniversary dinner, I have real big concerns about your loyalty
We
to
did call this a date with Section 8. So, I
and maybe
mean,
some of you have that kind of relationship with your agents. You're that close. Like, more power to you.
I do want to shift a little bit. Let's go ahead and shift to unearned fees because I think this is another area that is commonly misunderstood when we get into fee splitting. So, talk to me a little bit about what a real world example would be of how a fee splitting arrangement could work. How does that differ from maybe an illegitimate situation?
Yeah.
How can this be done correctly?
So this is one that gets a lot of confusion as well, LaDonna, and it comes down to a couple things that can simplify it. One is you can fee split with someone that is an actual employee of yours. So if you have a loan partner, if you have something like that, and you split your comp with them, or you split some type of fees, origination or yield on the actual loan, completely fine. That has to be written, it has to be documented, and they have to be an actual employee. So how these went sideways was this way. This is an interesting one. There was a partnership, and this partner, one of them was a title agent, and the other was an insurance agent. And so they were working with the lender, and as the lender would send things over to the title company, whether they went with the insurance company or not, because they were all in cahoots, the insurance person would get $200 on every loan, right? Every loan that we close, you get this much, you get $200. However, that insurance agent did zero work on that file. Zero, right? They didn't secure the insurance policy. They didn't do anything like that. And so that's how fee splitting got really hectic, because it was more based on who you were affiliated with rather than the work done on the file. So that's where it went sideways. That's where it is not compliant. Where it is compliant is if somebody actually does the work on the file. So you have your preferred title agent, and let's be honest, a good one is value beyond measure, because your closings are going to go well. Your clients aren't going to get all kinds of additional questions and fees that they have to come in with later, or refunds later. And so it makes your transaction really smooth. It's the bow at the end of your loan that makes you shine. And so a great title escrow officer is critical. And if they're actually doing that loan and they're actually performing the work on it, and they are compensated for that in their own fees that are outlined on that closing disclosure, it's more than fine. What you cannot do, and what they are seeing people that they used to try and do, not so much now, but what they would do is they'd say, hey, for every loan that I do, I'll give you 25 bips, or I'll give you $200, or I'll give you $500 for every loan that we do together. And that's where it's unearned, right? Because even
Mm-hmm.
though they did work on the file, that money was not tied to the actual work done on the file. And so it's out of scope. It doesn't warrant services rendered in fair market value for that time and that service.
I feel like you've done a fantastic job covering what is allowed, what is not allowed. Let's talk just quickly about enforcement. What are some of the penalties involved if someone is found out to be violating RESPA?
Well, they're not the worst, but they're definitely not the best. I mean, there's a lot of different enforcement, depends on what you've done. But it's about $10,000. You can incur a $10,000 fee. You can have license restrictions or license being banned.
Revocation.
Yeah, revocation, things like that. There are certain circumstances where the attorney general has been involved, and there's much greater consequences. Some fraud cases and things like that, or some, violations that go into other arenas of lending that compound and have gotten pretty significant. But overall, that's what you're looking at. That's what's being enforced.
Yeah. And we can clarify that will be per instance
Correct.
of what you are found violating, which again may be a little more of a deterrent for
Yeah.
people.
And you can get
So,
up to 1 year in prison per
yeah,
violation. So per violation, so you have 30 violations and you're found guilty on all 30. Not only do you have, the monetary amount that you're going to have to pay, but in some instances, it is penalized with a 1 year, jail time penalty per incident. So that could result in 30, 40, 50 years, depending on how much violation you go into. And yet there's still two camps, right? The camps that are like,
hmm,
I'm going to do it because I make a lot of money at it, and I'm going to bank on one heck of a good attorney if ever I'm in that case. And there's the others that stay so far away from it that they're missing business because they don't understand how they can leverage some of these rules to work for them.
bingo. So, on that, we're just about out of time. Is there any final piece of information that you would want to share with people who are on this call?
I think it's really important to know who you are and know your value add. This is critical. And I talked to a loan officer with a mega book of business, a large book of business. And I asked him, I noticed he didn't pay for anything. And I said, you have some of the top agents, and yet you don't sponsor events. You don't do this. You don't do that. Like, you don't buy their golf rounds. You're doing nothing. What is that? And I think I won't end with this coming from me, because this was from him, and I don't want to take credit where it's not due. He definitely had a narrative around this that I respect, and that I have held on to almost a decade later. And he said it's this simple. I tell my partners right up front when I'm building a relationship with them, because how you start that relationship is how that relationship is going to end. It's what they're going to expect out of you. He said, so right up front, I say, look, if you want me to foot the bill on luncheons, events, this and that, I'm not the right lender for you. He said, here's what I do provide. My loans close on time. I'm going to give your client a superior experience. I'm going to make sure that you're paid timely. And he gave them this value add that he had, right? I have a broad product mix, and I'm niche in this, and I got this and I got that. And he said, if I start paying for your things, that's money out of my pocket. And if I start losing out money out of my pocket, I got to come up with that from somewhere. And I'm going to start adding that to your loans. And then your loans are going to become expensive for your clients. And then your clients are not going, they're going to have to get less house, or they're going to have to get less this or less that, and he started pointing out, he says, and then that means less commission for you. He said, so I just don't pay for those things so that you can maximize your profitability. I can maximize my profitability, and the client doesn't pay for any of that. We're able to deliver a superior service to them. And if that's not for you, then I'm not your lender. And I thought there was something really special in that. And he said he starts every relationship like that. And he just says, if you're looking for a free ride or somebody that's going to be, a sugar daddy to your loans, go elsewhere,
Hmm.
like, or a sugar daddy to your clients or your events, go elsewhere. It's not me. And I have a lot of respect for that. And this guy, still in business, still doing one heck of a book of business, and lives by the same principle. And so I'm not saying you have to be to that extreme, but I'm saying you get to decide. You get to decide how you want to spend your money. You get to decide what type of relationships you want. And some relationships are too big of a pain in the rear to even want to pay for. So, you get to determine. It's your relationships, it's your business. You get to build it however you want. There'll be some people that will continue to buy their agents, and there's nothing we can do about that. They're going to do that. I'm just saying I've seen the industry where you don't have to, and you can still be very successful.
I love that. Perfect note to end on. For people wondering, we do make these webinars available for right now. They're available on our MaxClass YouTube channel. We do also, I have my own podcast called Take It to the Max, where I'm talking with different industry insiders. Jeana is a frequent guest and she has her own exciting something coming soon. So we want to, as a value proposition for you, for just being here, we love to give these things away for free because this is an industry that have given us both so much. We're so grateful for you. Thank you for being here. We will have another one of these coming up in 2 weeks. If you were registered for this one, we'll make sure that you get the info for that one. And as always, thank you for being here. Take it to the max.
Thank you, everyone. Have an amazing week.
Thanks all.